to the first ever Weights and Plates podcast. My name is Robert Santana, and joining me today is Trent Jones.
Howdy, folks.
And today we're going to introduce you to the podcast and kind of go over what I'm going to ramble about for these weeks, hopefully months, and maybe years to come, right?
That's right. Well, yeah, we've got 1,000 episodes mapped out here. You know, we'll get to all of those in time. So, you know, we got about the next 10 years of episodes mapped out, I'd say.
Very cool. Very cool. So I guess maybe I should probably start with the name. Weights and Plates. So that's the name of my gym. That's the name of my website. Now it's the name of the podcast. That's probably a good place to start, wouldn't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I guess it kind of goes back to when I was in college. Started reading fitness magazines like a lot of guys in my generation that go to the gym have, and got really into nutrition. I was studying pre-pharmacy at the time, taking a lot of science classes.
Okay.
And I found that I was more interested in diet and exercise. So I came up with this idea that, I was a college kid. I'm like, maybe I should, major in these two things. And, I could talk about that in a later podcast, but long story short, I'm a dietitian now. I have a master's in kinesiology, and, I'm a starting strength coach. I have a NSCA certified strength and conditioning specialist for our listeners that know what that is or know what the starting strength coach is. I think we have a lot of those since I kind of moderate the boards on that website. But for those of you who are not familiar, you should go to that website because there's a lot of good information there as well.
So that's startingstrength.com, right?
Startingstrength.com.
I think you've written, do you know how many articles you've written for Starting Strength at this point?
Oh, hell, I guess I can pull it up since we have time, right?
It's a bunch, yeah. I think if you go look up any of Robert's articles he's written, you can search for other stuff by this author, and there's a bunch. Some good content there.
Let's see. I have a lot. I have 8 articles, and I have actually more videos than articles. I didn't realize that. 13 videos and 4 small articles. So I have 8 articles, 14 videos, and 4 little short articles that they call their training log. Those are those 1,000-word or less articles, or maybe slightly over. But everything I post there gets posted to my website as well. But that's kind of where I spent a lot of my time. And at my gym, we're teaching a lot of the methods outlined in the book, and I've basically been contributing a lot on the diet front to it because they specialize in barbell training, and I'm one of their barbell coaches, but I'm also a dietitian. So back to that, that's how I kind of came up with the name Weights. You lift weights, plates, that's what you eat off of, so I'm a dietitian that can teach you how to weight lift. I'd say that I'm equally competent at both skills, although I get a lot of attention for the diet because in my circle, there's a lot more strength coaches and diet coaches.
Right.
A lot that are bigger and stronger than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm glad. Hopefully we can just talk about the weights today because I just ate fried chicken.
The plates.
And I think I'm killing my credibility here for talking about plates.
Yeah.
That's okay. But I have you here.
Yeah.
My name is Trent Jones, if you're wondering who this is speaking, and I am a starting strength coach as well. And I work with our good friend Darren Deaton, who is a physical therapist, over on the 40 Fit radio podcast. We have a starting strength gym as well. And so I am joining Robert here today just to kind of be your foil, right? And ask you some questions and talk about the training side of nutrition as well, because we know those two things go hand in hand. But I wanted to ask you, talking about your background here, when did you get interested in strength training and fitness? Do you remember the first time that you really got interested in this? Was it in high school or before then, or?
Well, I am a child of the late 80s, early 90s, and I was a big WWF, now WWE fan.
Right.
But, I'm dating myself here, so I was a WWF fan, and everybody was big, jacked, and strong. And my father was big and strong. He was a big, strong dude, and he actually lived at a YMCA in one of the residences, but the one in, it's in Niles, Illinois. If you drive past, they have a replica of the Leaning Tower sitting outside of it. So they call it the Leaning Tower YMCA. Anyway, so my dad exposed me to wrestling because he was a big Hulk Hogan fan. He was a big Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. So I watched all the action movies growing up. I was big into the Rocky movies and Stallone's bad action movies. I love bad action movies. I can still watch them today.
Oh yeah, well of course, yeah, because bad is good. when it comes to action
exactly. It
movies.
was so good, it's bad. That genre has died because now everything has to be so. I don't know.
We don't need another Mission Impossible. What we
No.
we need another Schwarzenegger. Like we need another Terminator.
Yeah. And The Rock doesn't quite cut it because he speaks good English.
Right? Yeah. He's way too articulate for.
You have to
for a
have
good
bad
action
English
hero.
to do this. I mean, listen to Stallone, listen to Arnold. You have two completely different accents, but it builds a
Jean-Claude
character.
Van Damme, like Bruce Lee. That's that's a good point.
Think about it. The foreign accents made it even much better. It's like it was like the picture of American action, but everybody had an accent.
Right? Yeah.
But anyways, like just being around that, like just being big and jacked was cool, at the time, and blowing shit up was cool, on the screen. So my first time in a weight room was probably 92, 93, I want to say. My dad took me to the weight room in this Y, and it was like the weight room in many of the Ys. It looked like a dungeon, black, white walls, black rubber floors, white equipment that you kind of see in old weight rooms now.
Right.
And I just remember he benched a whole lot, and I couldn't do anything because I would have been 11, I think, 10 or 11. I was under 12 because I remember you had to be 12 to be able to do anything in there with supervision.
Yeah.
So I had to be like, I don't know, somewhere between 8 and 10. I started going in there and just watching him. I couldn't do anything, but he showed me a dip, and then he put me on the parallel bars, and then I just sank. I was a little kid, and he's like, "Well, just hold yourself up there for a few seconds," And I just would follow him to all the machines, and he'd get his workout done. Then he'd get done, and we'd just hang out. So it's kind of like image was planted in my head. So I've had a soft spot for these rundown, dungy type gyms, because of that. So I could not wait to lift after this, and I couldn't because I was too young and I was not independent. I couldn't obviously take myself to a gym. I didn't have one at home. That wasn't a thing.
Right. Yeah.
And then the myths were circulating. So my dad. So I have two stepbrothers. I'm the only child of both of my parents. So my dad remarried, and she had two children from a previous marriage. All of us are men now. And they were my stepbrothers, and they are Eastern European. So they have these great Eastern European genetics, and they look like bodybuilders without touching weight. I mean, now they have now they have a fake belly with the ab outline,
Oh, right.
because they're almost 40, But you look at them and you think they're doing something even now.
Yeah, they're still like sub 15% body fat,
And then my brother, because he doesn't know any different, he's lived in that, physique his whole life. He's like, "What are you talking about? I'm like skinny now. I don't even lift, man."
Right.
And I'm like, "You live in Los Angeles. You're still, way more than everybody there, but you're in better shape than everybody everywhere else, So my dad told all of us that if we lifted weights too young, it would stunt our growth because that was the common myth of the time.
Right. Yes, I heard that growing up.
Yeah. And it didn't bother me much. I wanted to get into a weight room. And then some of the guys that were already in sports and junior high were taller than me, so I didn't see the correlation.
Right. Yeah.
I'm like, this guy's 6'2". What are you talking about, man?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I think I was really exposed to lifting weights in the weight room in football. So our junior high weight room, I believe, that was the first time we ever got to actually see a weight room. It was tiny, I can't remember what we had. Probably some dumbbells. There might have been one barbell in there.
Rusty plates.
Rusty plates. Oh yeah, the whole works. And then of course high school, you're a freshman and you see all these like huge, like enormous looking seniors and juniors on the varsity team. And you're like, you see those guys pumping iron and out there and getting.
I got the same image in my head, man. I remember.
Yeah, and that was great. Yeah, that was a much bigger weight room. Also rusty, dingy, hadn't been mopped in at least a couple decades, and it was great. But yeah, it's interesting. There's somewhere I don't know when that happened, but at some point, like we all knew, and I knew that if you wanted to get big and strong, like you went and you lifted weights and you trained hard. Easy, scientific, like, getting fancy with the programming, none of that really entered the equation. That wasn't my image of training. But at the same time, I also remember that narrative of things like, well, you shouldn't lift weights too young because it'll stunt your growth. Or, if you want to do, if you want to get big, you got to do low reps. If you want to get cut, you got to do high reps, all the crazy myths, right?
Yeah, I remember hearing that.
It was kind of like, at some point, there was this different angle that entered into the mythology of training, which was more prescriptive, like, X, Y, and Z creates this adaptation, and a different approach creates this adaptation. And yeah, that's true to an extent, but all the mythology was wrong, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of funny. I'm not sure when exactly that cultural shift happened, but this is what I seem to learn talking to guys who are older than me, is that they all knew, like for a long time, we've all known, like you want to get strong and be a good athlete, it's like you're going to lift some heavy stuff and you're going to do some basic, really hard conditioning. And your whole training program might consist of like 8 exercises. And then somehow in the 90s, somewhere that all kind of fell apart and it got really complicated.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Yates was Mr. O for the first part of the 90s, and Ronnie took over later.
Yeah, yeah.
I know Yates changed the way. I don't want to really go into bodybuilding too much. It's not really a bodybuilding podcast, but I know that bodybuilding of the 70s and that era, 60s, 70s, 80s, or even before then when it was even more niche, really changed in the 90s. And it became about getting as big as humanly possible. And these guys were, probably taking more drugs than the previous generation and doing more exercises. And one of the things, and, I'll reference steroids periodically because I have my problems with how information has been based upon what the drugs do versus what, your diet and your exercise can do.
Right.
But, they allow you to do more. That's why people take them. I think Jose Canseco once said he would not have been a major league player without steroids. He's like, he was a painfully mediocre ball player. When somebody was asking him, like some of these guys, like, Mark McGuire, Barry Bonds were gifted ball players, and the roids allowed them to do it even better. You couldn't fake the technical proficiency of these guys, but
right.
Some of the guys made it just because they were on drugs too. Some of them have admitted it. But the reason I bring that up early on is because a lot of what we know, or what we think we know today, a lot of what's being promoted today and what's been promoted since probably, like you said, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, is extrapolation from training on steroids,
Yeah. That's a good point, right? Yeah. So you bring up a memory, and this is relevant. So I remember in high school, I knew I needed to get bigger because I was a smaller guy. I was 160 pounds, 162 pounds maybe. And I was trying to gain some weight. And I'm not a big framed guy. I'm about 5'8". So I wasn't starting with a big frame anyway. And so I remember going to the GNC store and talking to the guy behind the counter, and like, I need to gain some weight. I need to bulk, right? Yeah. And he's like, well, how much are you looking to put on? What time? And I was like, well, I got 2 months.
Same experience.
Yeah, I was like, well, I got 2 months left of off season. Can I put on 15 pounds? And he's like, lean muscle. He's like, you better take steroids, brother. He was joking, and he's like, and I was like, or do you just want to bulk up? And I'm like, well, I don't know what the difference is. Of course I want lean muscle, but I was like, well, what about just bulking? He's like, okay, well, you can do that. Here, take this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was just some like generic mass gainer 9,000.
Yeah. Oh,
and
they all had that like 1,000 number at the end.
Yeah, that was 8,000, 9,000.
Yeah.
And I remember that thing was bundled with a DVD. Mm-hmm. And the DVD was a bunch of bodybuilders of the era. It was like Branch Warren, Ronnie Coleman might have been in it, but just a bunch of these Jay Cutler, a bunch of these bodybuilding guys were in it. And I remember they had like a program in there that's like how to put 1 inch on your arms in 24 hours. Mm-hmm. And
I've seen that. Yeah. Oh, I think I did something like this once.
Yeah.
Go on.
And so it basically, it was all about, like, it required, they're like, all right, you can only do this like once a year at max, and it's going to take all this training. So we recommend like this 6 weeks of preparation before you're ready to put the inch on your arms, which right there, right? So you're going to do 6 weeks of training before you do the workout. And on the day of, it basically consisted of like just like ridiculously long supersets of all these different curls and tricep extensions, and separated by, like, between every session, there were like 3 or 4 sessions throughout the whole day that you're going to do all these crazy supersets. And they were all separated by, you need to drink a glass. It was like, wake up in the morning, 8 a.m., drink a glass of Cell-Tech protein. Do like, 8 sets of these curls. Yeah. And then it's like, all right, drink a glass of Cell-Tech, rest for 3 hours, come back to the gym. So basically, if you do the whole thing, you've gone through like half of a tub of Cell-Tech. And and I had no idea at the time. I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, I'm going to try this. I got to put an inch on my arms. But yeah, I suppose that's to say that these guys that are selling this product, A, they're selling a product. B, these guys that are selling the product are very chemically assisted.
Mm-hmm. That's been a lot of products in our business.
Yeah.
And I think when I finally reached the weight room, I was 15, and I joined the swim team. And then that's when I first got exposed to the weight room, and the coach had us doing the pyramid. Rip talks about the pyramid. Rip is Mark Ripito, the author of Starting Strength. So, might throw that name out there periodically. And he referenced the pyramid in the Starting Strength textbook. And I actually was subjected to that every single swim season. And I got a little bit stronger because I was aging and my testosterone was going up as a function of puberty.
Yeah.
But you basically did a set of 10, a set of 8, a set of 6, a set of 4, and a set of 2. And then by the time you got to the set of 2, the weight's ascending, the reps are descending, and then you feel like you're strong, and then you see the guy who's a senior and he's benching 2 plates, and you're like, oh, I want to be as strong as that guy. Anyways, right. At 15 I started with the bar, and I think my senior year I was close to 200-pound bench, but that was the only lift that we did with a barbell, thinking back on it now.
Just the bench press.
Just the bench press. We did the bench press, and chin-ups were encouraged, but most of the guys are too weak to do them. At least the younger guys. I was a sophomore. I was 15. It was my first year in the sport. By my second year, I was able to crank out some chin-ups, and then by I think my senior year, I could do like 10 in a row and do them wide grip, and it was just a non-issue. Your lats get really, really strong from swimming, and we could do an episode on that another time. But basically, I developed these swimmer muscles. My back got wider, my triceps were more developed, my pecs got bigger. That's part of that's genetic too. My dad has well-developed pecs at baseline, whether he trains or not. I'm the same way. So, swimming filled them out more, which was nice. But, I was looking at the guys that were going to state, and I know now that these guys were the more gifted athletes. They were very lean. You can see all their muscles. They were very thin. To me, they looked big because all I saw was muscle mass versus myself. I was this 160 to 165 pound. I guess I consider myself chubby. And I now know that I was just, under muscled.
Right.
Some people might call that skinny fat,
Sure.
And that's, what I would define that as now is, you have a normal level of body fat, but you don't have a lot of muscle mass,
Right.
But I consider that fat because I didn't look like that guy with the six-pack who was winning the state meet,
Yes, right. Yep.
And that's another thing that kind of evolved in the early 90s. So my dad was one of these big construction worker type guys. He didn't have abs, but he didn't have a belly. His chest led his stomach. That's how I describe this now. If your chest leads your stomach, you're probably in good shape,
Yeah, right. Yeah, he's just kind of looked thick.
Yeah, and I think still, like, you're out in the world, that's acceptable. People just say, oh, you look strong,
Yeah.
In the, pop culture, that's fat, I guess, especially if you're in, like, the bodybuilding circles or on YouTube. Stay the hell off there if you haven't already. YouTube, Instagram, everybody looks like an anatomy chart, right? But out in the world, if somebody sees you and you look like, a guy who has a chest that's bigger than your stomach, irrespective of muscle definition, they think you're just strong,
Yeah, sure. You look good in a t-shirt.
Yeah, and that's how my dad was. He had some arm definition because he did lift. He was in the weight room, but for the most part, he was just a big, strong guy.
Yeah.
And I didn't get I'm not as thick as he is. He's got the one of those somatotypes. He'd be like an endomorph, I guess.
Okay.
So
yeah. It's a bigger bone structure and
the guy has big thick wrists that are probably as thick as my arm. And big ankles. And he's just a bigger dude and he's taller. And at the time, he was like 6 foot, 205, and, pretty good shape. He looked like a big muscular guy. If I had to put a body fat percentage on him, I'd say he's probably 20, 22, something like that. Mm-hmm. But, he lifted a lot. I think he spent time in the leg press. He leg pressed like 800 or 900 or something like that. And, bench 3. And this is just a guy jerking around in the gym and, lifting a decent amount of weight. So at some point in the late 90s, this fixation with looking like an anatomy chart started, having visible abs, at all costs. And in bodybuilding, that was always desired, that you just had these ripped abs. But I feel like the mainstream movie or TV industry or other areas of pop culture, it wasn't as pushed. Even you could watch some old 80s movies like Lethal Weapon. Mel Gibson's pretty lean there. But I guess, like, growing up, I didn't, like, obsess over that. It didn't become a thing that I paid attention to until probably when I was in high school.
Yeah, right.
Like
right.
late 90s, early 2000s, it seemed to be this fixation. Like you have magazines in the supermarket. Now it's not even like muscular development where the guys are like 260 and ripped. Those already existed. I'm talking about your basic health magazine would have a guy who's pretty lean, not as lean as a bodybuilder, and of normal size. And that became the standard. Okay, this is a healthy male right here. I mean, it was called Men's Health, right?
Right.
And then all the guys in the movies looked like fitness models. You know, that's what we would refer to them as now. You know, you got these actors now. They're, probably $150 to $170, depending on height. And they're very lean. You can see all their muscles.
Yeah, that's this is another cultural shift that happened. That, yeah, you're right. So like in the 80s and early 90s, I think about the image that pops in my head is that the American Gladiator type, and some
WWF, yeah,
WWF, right? And some of those guys were like super lean, but generally they were big and strong and jacked looking, not necessarily anatomy charts, right?
Yeah.
So some people trace this change back to the movie Fight Club with Brad Pitt.
Yeah,
where he was super lean, and it's the fame. It's just some famous scenes where he takes his shirt off, and the guy just
beat
looks,
up. He's all bloody, but then he has ripped abs.
Yeah, his abs are just popping out everywhere. And yeah, you're right. There was some changeover where, like, you remember the big jacked guys from the 90s and the 80s, but now all of a sudden everyone's getting super lean, and yeah, it's so strange nowadays. Yeah, we look at our pop culture nowadays, and it's just kind of a given. Like, you can't get a role in a leading movie. You can't be a superhero unless you're 8% body fat.
Yeah. And whereas before, you just had to be at least 250.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
well,
exactly.
Actually, it was more like 200 because the camera adds the other 50 pounds. I learned that from Schwarzenegger's biography. They made him lose muscle and get down to 209 because at 240 they thought it was too much.
Oh yeah. Oh sure.
They wanted him to look 240, not look 300.
Yeah.
But no, you're right. The WWF body was basically, big barrel chest, big arms, and just
Hulk Hogan, right? Big muscular guy, but he's not super ripped.
No, had a little bit of I wouldn't even call it a gut. He just didn't have abs,
Yeah,
big barrel chest. Scott Hall was the one that I think of because I'm Cuban, so he played Razor Ramon. He's not even Cuban in real life, but his character was Cuban, so he was one of my favorites. And he had the big barrel chest, big traps, big back, and then just no definition in his stomach, and it didn't matter. That was like the norm, and that's how American Gladiator was too.
Yeah.
And then at some point, Fight Club would probably be it because my brother was obsessed with trying to achieve that Brad Pitt physique, and my brother has more muscle mass than Brad Pitt for one. And, he's still pretty lean, but he's not that lean. Brad Pitt's one of those really lean dudes just naturally, We didn't understand that. We thought all this was achieved through training. So this is where it gets this is kind of like it's kind of my motivation for the podcast.
Yeah.
It's a perfect segue. Like, we grew up seeing these bodies, and somehow in the messaging, we were all convinced that hard work can allow us to turn into one of them.
Right. Yeah. If you just work hard enough.
Just work hard enough.
Be an NFL player. You can be Brad Pitt. You can. Yeah.
I didn't get it so much with professional sports, although maybe you have experience with that. Like with sports, it was pretty well established that these guys were gifted freaks,
Yeah, you figure that out by your senior year. You're like, okay, those people are just a different breed.
Yeah. When it came to sports and technology too, because that was the tech boom. So you had all these 22-year-old billionaires popping up, which was unheard of before then.
Sure, yeah.
Typically, you picture the old rich billionaire that started his company 50 years ago but then in the 90s, you got somebody like Bill Gates, who's in his 30s at the time, I think. And, he was a billionaire by the late 80s, or a multimillionaire at least. He was the richest man in the world when I was in high school. So you had two things going on. You had the tech thing, like, okay, if you want to be a billionaire in your 20s, that's genetics. These guys are just very gifted, And they certainly do have their gifts, and they got into a, flourishing sector of the economy at the right time. Right. A lot of factors there. But, you just thought, you're like, oh, I can't do that unless you're obviously one of them doing it. But that was acknowledged, right? And same thing with professional sports. Like, there's only one Michael Jordan. I can't work hard on the basketball court and be Michael Jordan. Like, that is a freak athlete. Or even like certain musicians. They can hit these high notes. You just acknowledge that was genetics.
Right.
But when it came to bodybuilding, or yeah, let's just call it bodybuilding. When it came to building muscle, losing fat, building a physique, somehow the messaging was that, oh, you can work hard and do this.
Right. Yeah. You can be anything.
Yeah, and I see it in powerlifting too now. I wasn't really I didn't know what that sport was at the time. I learned about it through lifting, but when I got involved in powerlifting, that was kind of the messaging there too. Oh, 500, you can get to 600, you get to 700, just keep working hard,
Right. Yeah. Just do this program and download my 6-week course. And I think this is important to know. So if you're wondering why we're kind of talking about this stuff, like it's important to set the stage of where fitness has come from, because if you just drop, if we would have dropped our 15-year-old selves right into today and skipping all that time period, it's such a different landscape than what we experienced. Yeah, powerlifting is big. I had never really heard of powerlifting, even back in high school. Like, I knew one guy who maybe was involved in, like, he knew somebody that did powerlifting, but I didn't really know what it was. I knew what bodybuilders were.
Texas, it's a high school sport, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Well, in some places, and not in the school I went to.
Okay.
There's like a couple of guys who went to a separate gym that I didn't even know. I'd never been there, but they did powerlifting. But, bodybuilding was out front because we all knew the big guys in the movies. We knew Arnold, and we had seen bodybuilders in popular culture. But it's important to know this because this is where I think this is where the division started, where people started to believe what you're talking about, that they can make their body into anything they want, and that certain people held the key to doing that, right? And we know that's just not true. No, and it seems like bullshit. All that's happened that in the meantime is that we've just tried to make things more and more complicated and more elaborate in our approaches to try to make these adaptations happen, when we really need to kind of just pull it all back, simplify things, and get back to the pardon the pun, the meat and potatoes of training, right?
Which is what you need to fucking eat too.
That's right. Yeah, you got to eat, right? And it doesn't have to be that simple. And in fact, the interesting thing is, if you go and you study a little bit of strength culture and physical culture, this is the way it was for a long time before this entertainment side of the business started happening.
That's a very good way to put it. It's the entertainment side of the business. I think what really got me wrapped up in the hard work messaging was when I read Arnold's Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding, and he started showing different body types before and afters, and he's like, okay, this guy, so for those of you who don't know what somatotyping is, you have your ectomorph, typically the guy you hate. He's like 140 pounds, and you can see every muscle on his body, and he can eat all day long and not gain weight.
Yeah.
And that's an extreme. The extremes are outliers, first of all, because most people are a mix of all of them. But that's your pure ectomorph. Then your mesomorph is like, a guy like my brother who looks like, he's a little amateur bodybuilder without touching a weight. You can see every muscle on his body, and he's a pretty decent size,
Yeah.
And then you have your endomorph, who's your round, pear-shaped guy who's just fat everywhere. That's the guy that can get up to 300 pounds just looking at food.
It's the big barrel-chested, lineman.
Yeah, then you have like mixes of them, I put on some body fat. I have a hard time building muscle, so that makes me a little bit of an ectomorph. I can get strong, and I can build muscle, but I can put on fat. So there's elements of all three in my body type, and I find that most males that I work with, most people that I work with, females too, are probably in that category where, you can gain a little bit of fat, you have, muscle comes harder, and, you're tend to be of, small to medium sized frame,
Yeah.
And then I've worked with the extremes as well, so we're not leaving you out either. But I'm just saying, when you're looking at it like a normal distribution, a bell curve, most people in the middle show elements of all of them. That's been my experience training people.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, so then Arnold was showing, okay, this guy was an endomorph, and look at him when he bodybuilded. This guy was an ectomorph, and look at him when he bodybuilded. So anybody can be a bodybuilder, like that's what he was kind of, it's in the book there,
right.
And, for all the hell we like to give Arnold and those guys, that was probably one of the better books out there in terms of the general training principles, because he was very clear. If you want muscle mass, you got to do the barbell. As he put it, you have to lift with barbells. Barbells put on mass. And, he said all the quote unquote toning or refining, I don't know what word he used, but basically to bring out more definition, he used dumbbells, but he said the mass comes from the barbell. That's your foundation, So I soaked that in like a sponge. I'm like, okay, that makes sense. I was already benching. And the second thing that Arnold debunked young, which other people learned later, I felt like I was fortunate enough to pick that up and read the damn thing. I don't know if most people read the damn thing. It's a long, big, thick book.
Yeah.
But I sat down and read the damn thing. And the second thing he said was that, he squatted deep when he started out. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I thought that's bad for your knees. And I'm 19 at the time, so I'm getting in the game early here,
Right,
no powerlifting background, never squatted in swimming. And I'm like, oh, so I can squat deep and not hurt my knees? Okay. So, I knew to squat deep at a young age. What I didn't know was that I'm not doing what the guy in the picture is doing, but I think I am.
Right. Yeah.
And number two, what the guy in the picture is doing is just as wrong as what I'm doing. It's just another form of wrong. But we'll get to that. So, I knew I had to squat deep and I knew I had to lift barbells. By the age of 19, I figured that out. I was already able to do chin-ups because I was a swimmer, and I was already bench pressing. I didn't know how to train the rest of my body. And even at that age, that's when I kind of decided, I'm like, I want to figure out how to, look better and do this without taking steroids or being unhealthy about it and following a reasonable diet. And the health aspect has to be there, it has to be there. And, I just kind of carried on from there and, I would squat, I would do chin-ups and I would bench. And then there was another shift that happened in that business. So there was the evolution of the lifting guru too. So in the past, it had been the bodybuilder, that's on Muscle and Fitness with veins popping out of his freaking fingers,
Right.
And, looking all freaking leather-skinned and tan and all those other things. That's your guru, right? And then it turned into the fitness model, became your guru, and the Hollywood actor. But then at some point, the exercise scientist entered the mix.
Yes.
Now you have people with credentials. And I remember the first time I heard the word PhD was my first year at the university, my second year in college. I did 1 year at the community college. So I went away to school for the first time. I had my own weight room. I was maxing out my meal plan and having to, put more money on it. I was just eating a bunch of food at the dorms because I was told, you got to bulk to gain muscle. So this is kind of an important aspect of this. And we're going to talk about weight loss too. I know a lot of consumers of fitness are interested in weight loss. So we're not, a podcast on getting big and strong and fat, but that's where I was. I wanted to look better and they kept telling me you don't have enough muscle. This was correct. How do I fix that? I got a lot of pieces of it, but not all of it. So you got to eat a bunch of food and lift. So I'm like, okay. And this one guy's like, well, so I'll eat 3,000 calories, right? And this guy's like one of those short, stocky power lifter looking guys, and he's probably on stuff at the time. I didn't know. And then he's like, he looks at me, he works at the vitamin shop. So you were at GNC. I went to the vitamin shop.
Yep.
It just opened in 2002. It was a brand new type store. I'd been to GNC before that, but the vitamin shop was new and cool, So I go in there and I'm talking to the guy and he looks around and makes sure his manager's not looking. He's like, you know what? Fuck 3,000, eat 4,000. He's like, you got to weigh out the consequences. No, he said, yeah, you're going to gain fat, but you got to weigh out the consequences, kid.
Right.
And he was probably a few years older than me, He had to be like 20 maybe, and I'm like 17, 18. And I'm like, all right. So, I did my first bulk, right? And I followed a program from Men's Fitness, and that was the first time I saw the word periodization. And it seemed rather logical. It's like, okay, so you start with high reps, work to low reps. You do a hypertrophy phase, strength phase, power phase. So hypertrophy means enlargement of muscle fibers. So as humans, as far as we know, our muscle fibers get bigger. We don't add new muscle fibers. That's what the science says right now. So you had phases for this. And, I'm going to have a lot of rants about quote-unquote hypertrophy training to come. But for the sake of this discussion, the magazine I was reading, the publication I'd read, it was you do 8 to 12 reps. Then you go from 6 to 8 for strength, and then you go from 4 to 6 for power, which is kind of laughable because now that we know what power means, power is strength displayed quickly. That's what you see in Olympic lifting. But, I followed it, and I ate a bunch of food, and I saw myself growing, and then I had a big gut. So I'm like, I don't look like I lift, though,
Right.
I mean, I did. I was wide, but like at that point, I was definitely fat at that point. The strength wasn't there. I was probably squatting for a single, like, 275, 315, something like that. And I was benching like 205, and, I could still do pull-ups at that weight, and I could still do dips at that weight, but I was not strong. And I thought deadlift was a lower back exercise because I was doing it wrong and my low back would get sore.
Yeah, every lift is a lower back exercise if you do it wrong enough.
So, I got out of that I, was like, okay, I need to cut. So I got to do high reps, like you said earlier. Okay. So then I did a keto diet, but then I'm like, well, 0 carbs is better than 20 carbs.
Okay.
So I'm trying to go to 0.
So you kind of, you were a trendsetter back then. You went straight to keto.
Well, back then it was called, it was called keto. So what I followed was called the cyclical ketogenic diet, the CKD. And I followed Lyle McDonald's book called The Ultimate Diet 2.0.
Okay. Yep.
And I still agree with it in theory. I like the content and the way he wrote it. Lyle's kind of out there, but his content's pretty good, And I totally fucked it up. So the way I don't advocate for this diet, first of all, but the first sentence on there is like, if you're not under 15% body fat, don't do this diet. And I'm like, probably 25% at the time,
You're like, all right, cool. I'm in.
I'm like, well, if a little bit's good, more is better. That's the whole mentality. 20-year-old kid. I'm like, I'm just going to go right into it. I got this, and I'm trying to, and then he's telling you to eat, okay, during the week, eat 20 carbs or less. So I'm like, first of all, I have to get to 0,
Yeah.
Because 0 is better than 20 and it's impossible, first of all. So I'm trying to get to 0, and then you're supposed to refuel your muscle glycogen on the weekend. So it's a cyclical ketogenic diet. So on the weekend, you're supposed to go 70% fat, I think, 70% carb, and then the rest is fat and protein, right?
Yeah.
Well, we would go to buffets and do all you can eat shit. So I'm like just getting all 3 of the mac. I'm like going over my calories, and I got to the point where I had all the symptoms of over dieting, like, libido went out the window. I just had no energy. I could barely train. I'm doing 15s at the time because high reps is better for fat loss. I lost all my strength, lost all my muscle mass. It burnt me out to the point where I didn't want to train for about a year. And, that was my early exposure to this shit as an adult living independently. And from that point, I just read various things and would just keep doing, I'd recycle that periodized workout. I kind of like plan my training, for lack of a better word. I plan my training in a way where I go from high reps to low reps, recycle, high reps to low reps, recycle. Then fast forward, I'm getting my kinesiology degree. At that point, I graduated from the nutrition program. And I meet a guy who, comes from RIP School of Thinking. He has a powerlifting and weightlifting background. And he tells me, you don't have to curl to get arms. Because, like yourself, I was obsessed with, getting bigger arms.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was my weak point, Trent. I had disproportionately smaller arms. I believed all this bullshit.
Yeah, I could hardly tell you how to squat, but I could tell you how to do like 8 different types of curls.
Oh, yeah, me too. Yeah. And I hated doing them because one of the things that I realized early on, in addition to Arnold saying that barbells were better for your foundation, I only saw results from the barbell exercises, the chin-ups and the dips. Right. And I do all this other assistance stuff like curls and extensions, and I'd be like, my biceps aren't growing, my traps aren't growing, my side delt isn't growing because I wasn't pressing. Who pressed? Arnold,
right, yeah. Oh no.
Arnold had clean and press in the book, which was great. Now looking back on it, it was great to have that in there because back then they had to clean their presses. They didn't walk it out of the uprights.
Yeah.
I don't understand. So I'm like, well, I can't curl that much weight, so I'm never going to curl enough weight to press it because I didn't know that a clean had to be, cleaned.
Right.
I thought it was an arm exercise. So I'm like, I'm going to waste all my work cleaning it up, and the weight's going to be too light to press anything. So I just, I dropped that, never spent time overhead. And then this guy tells me, you don't have to curl. I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, just do chin-ups and, squat and deadlift and bench press, And they didn't press it. This is 2008. Press wasn't cool yet. The starting strength had been out for 3 years at that time, and it was even more underground than it is now.
Yep.
So I didn't know what any of that was. So that's the first time I heard that. And then when I was training with him, we were in this little dungeon gym in the Salvation Army. He taught me how to hold the bar on my back the same way we teach it. The rest of his coaching, I can't really recall. He put me into a pretty good low bar squat. Better than I've seen at other gyms, because when I had to go through the starting strength seminar, I already knew how to hold the bar. Like that, I was able to self-teach that because I was coached on that, So
okay, yeah, right.
That method has circulated to Western Illinois.
Yeah.
And so I would just squat low bar, and I was able to get deeper that way without as much of a problem. My hip flexors would get tight because I was getting knee slide, but I didn't know what that was, And I did that, but then I still wasn't satisfied. And then at some point when I was finishing up that master's program, I read an article on bodybuilding.com that made me laugh, and it kind of was written in a way that, something from the 1980s would have been written. This had to be 2009-ish. And the guy's like, back before the bench press, how much you could put overhead was a measure of a man, of masculinity, or some macho shit like that. The article's still up on bodybuilding.com somewhere, but I just started cracking up, and I'm like, most of this is bullshit, but I love these articles, and
Yeah.
it's entertaining.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm like, he has a very good point, though. I'm like, I can't put shit overhead because I don't train that damn lift. So I started doing overhead. I started pressing, and later on, I found this other book and started push pressing and alternating that with strict press. So strict press, push press. And long story short, I threw out my neck with dumbbell press, and then I periodically threw it out trying to barbell press. And then in 2013, I found a video of this guy with a thick Texas drawl in a CrossFit gym. I didn't know it was a CrossFit gym. I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, that looks like a legit strength training facility,
Yeah.
But it was just a CrossFit box, but I never CrossFitted. So like I looked at that like, oh, this guy's legit, and like, oh, you want your forearms vertical, the bar over your wrist over your elbows. And I'm like, wow, this guy explains it really good. This is Rip I'm talking about, obviously.
Yeah, right.
And then I'm like, I want to watch every video on this stuff. And then, me, I'm thinking I'm doing exactly what he's showing, right? Because I don't realize that I move different than I think I'm moving at the time, Then I go to the gym, and at the same time I had been reading about sets of 5. I remember my brother, when I was into men's fitness when I was 18, my other brother, who tended to be more ecto-meso build, he was thin but muscular,
Mm-hmm. Right.
He got really lean at one point because he dieted and did a bunch of training volume, and just doing a lot of cardio mostly. And he was already lean to begin with, so getting him from lean to ripped was not hard,
Right.
at the time.
Didn't take a whole lot.
But I remember him telling me at that age that one guy told him, yeah, you want to get big, do 5 sets of 5. And I just remembered that. It kind of lingered in the back of my head, but I never did it,
Yeah, it's a nice, you can remember that, right? 5 by 5.
Yeah, I just remembered that.
Right.
I never, ever did it. So at this point, 10 years had passed, and I still had never done it. And my friend, been putting my friend through these bullshit training programs that I've been following, and he yells at me one day. He's like, this shit doesn't fucking work. Give me something that works. Fast forward. He's a typical personal training client that can't stick to anything, but I didn't know of it at the time. So he's blaming me. His concerns were legitimate, but when I actually trained him, he did starting strength for 9 months, and then he just was back to non-compliant, compliant, non-compliant, compliant.
Right.
His baseline strength is better now than it would have been if he didn't do that, though. So he got the benefit. Anyways, I'm like, well, what does work? So I'm thinking what you're saying earlier, it kind of comes back here. I'm like, who was big in high school? And I'm like, guys who played football and wrestled. What did they do? Oh, they squatted and did like curls and chin-ups and, deadlifts and shit,
Yeah.
So I called my brother who had played football, because at this point I'm still naive and I don't understand the genetic correlation here. I'm like, Mario, what'd you do? His name is Mariusz, but we call him Mario because he picked the Super Mario name, I guess.
Oh, yeah,
He's Polish. His name is Mariusz, but I'll call him Mario, except sometimes I'll call him Mariusz when I'm fucking with him.
Yeah.
My dad calls him Mariusz. Anyway, so I asked him, I'm like, hey, what'd you do in high school when you lifted? And he's like, I purposely lifted light because I was worried about stunting my growth. But, we'd do squats and, curls and, deadlifts and chin-ups and all that stuff. And I'm like, interesting. Then I remembered another piece of Arnold's book. Again, Arnold doesn't get enough credit from starting strength because Arnold led me to starting strength. I don't know if anybody else got there through that route, but I got there through that route because in the beginning of the book, when he's talking about his history when he was a teenager, he's like, yeah, I did full body workouts with barbell exercises, three times a week.
I think he, in fact, when he was a teenager, won some junior weightlifting competitions in Austria. Yeah, so...
Well, back then you had to do the weightlifting competition to compete in bodybuilding.
That's right. It was part of the sport.
Yeah. So I didn't know that, but what I did remember was he said that he started out doing barbell exercises mostly, 3 times a week, but then he needed to break his muscle groups apart, or so he thought, and that required more time, and he couldn't do that in a full body fashion. So that's when he went to split routine workouts. That's how he was telling the story, this is how we got to split routine.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, well, if that's what you started with, why is your novice program a 6-day split, where you're dividing the muscle groups up?
Right.
So I'm like, where's the fucking program you followed? So I Google it, and then, somebody had an article up. It's still up. It's Reg Park was Arnold's mentor at one point. And they had similar body structure. So Arnold tried to strive to be like him, look like him,
Right.
And I looked up the, Reg Park or Arnold beginner programs, and this one thread on bodybuilding.com, the real Arnold Schwarzenegger beginner programs. And it was basically, all right, you do 5 sets of 5 squats, but the first 2 sets are warm-ups. So you're doing 3 sets of 5, right?
3 sets of 5.
And then you're pressing one day, you're benching one day, then you're deadlifting 1 set of 5, but you'll do 5 singles if you're advanced, 5 sets of 1 if you're advanced. So And then they had like arm curls and a couple other things. And, I did the first thing that most people who look at starting strength do. They're like, well, this isn't enough. So I started doing rows, and
Yeah, you got to add.
adding other shit. And then I'm at the gym one day and this dude next to me at 24 Hour Fitness is like, you doing 5x5, man? I'm like, yeah. Well, which one are you doing? I'm like, which one? I'm doing the Reg Park 5x5. And that's the least popular one because it's like a small website and the bodybuilding, hollows of the internet.
Right.
And he's like, well, I'm doing Mad Cow. You should try Mad Cow. So I look up Mad Cow, and then I find strong lifts, and then I start looking at that, and it's okay, 3x5 squat, 3x5 press alternated with, or 5x5 squat, 5x5 press alternated with the bench press, and barbell rows alternated with the deadlift. Deadlift's
Right.
1x5. And I was about to start doing this, and then I'm reading up, when I'm looking up Mad Cow and strong lifts, I see some little thing in the Google description of one of the websites I'm looking at, and it's like, strong lifts is a ripoff of Mark Ripato's starting strength. And I'm like, that's the dude in the fucking video that fixed my damn press,
There you go.
So I'm like, no, fuck. I'm following his program. So then I went to the website, and then there was like websites dedicated to Rip at the time. Then I'm sure they're still up. Like one of them had like all these Rip quotes on the board just on one website.
Yeah.
And I liked his humor, his dry humor. He reminded me a lot of people I knew growing up, and I started getting on the boards and reading the boards, and I, followed the program, didn't buy the book, didn't even know there was a textbook. I thought it was just another lifting template. I called it a program. I didn't know templates were at the time.
Right.
So I just follow it, tear my adductor, 3 months in, because of course, I know how to squat press and deadlift and bench press.
Oh, 3 weeks in. That's pretty good. That's impressive.
I started in May and I tore it in August. No, 3 months. June,
Okay,
July, 3
yeah.
months. Sorry. If I said weeks, that was wrong. It's 3 months.
Yeah.
So I'm like, shit. I'm like, how did I hurt myself? So I go on the boards and I'm like, well, let me just ask him, I'll put a video up on his Q&A and see if he even responds. I'm thinking he's like this huge celebrity guy,
Right.
So I put the video up and he says all this shit's fucked up essentially, and somehow I figured out there was a coach in town, and then he, Paul Horn, the legendary Paul Horn, he's in Boise, Idaho now. And he fixed me real fast, and it felt like he really didn't do a whole lot, but it did a whole lot, if you know what I mean. He told me to do a couple things, but it was dramatically different. Then I ran it myself again, didn't go back, and then tore the other adductor 3 months later.
Oh, wow.
But a long story short, I started training that way. I started focusing on barbell training, which the average person, some of which are listening to this, associate that with the big fat guy who's, squatting a bunch of weight, And that's not true. The reason that I even was drawn to the sport of powerlifting was because another thing, I'm telling you, that freaking Arnold book was on the money. He had mentioned that a lot of bodybuilders powerlifted in the offseason, including Columbo, who won when Arnold retired,
Exactly. Yeah. And Columbo even competed in some World's Strongest Man competitions at one point. Yeah. Famously strong guy.
There's an undeniable correlation between strength and muscle mass.
Yeah.
And I thought that I just wasn't fucking strong enough. And the other reality that I came to when my buddy called me out about my programs being bullshit was that the guys in the gym that looked the way that I wanted to look were lifting more than I was lifting. They're like repping out 225 on the bench because they bench every day,
Right.
Which that actually works, by the way. That's another thing I discovered through my own training history.
Sure, yeah.
The bros figure that out. You bench and curl every day, you'll have nice pecs and arms. So that does work.
Exactly. But there's this threshold, right? It's like these are the guys. It's because they're doing 225, right? They're not doing 135. Right?
No, they're doing 2 plates.
It's 2 plates, not 1 plate.
And I could barely do it once.
Yes, exactly. And that's the key.
So what I was trying to get to earlier was that these exercise scientists started surfacing. And then later on, you had exercise scientists. So the first batch of exercise scientists were unknown in the industry. They didn't compete in anything. They weren't in any magazines. They were publishing in peer-reviewed articles, and they worked at universities. And you would have only heard of them if you were in academia. Then that evolved into bodybuilders with, academic credentials who have published stuff before. Now you have these exercise scientists that lift. And that's kind of where it's went. So it's went from the bodybuilder to the exercise scientist to the actor. So the bodybuilder to the actor/entertainer to the exercise scientist to now the exercise scientist lifter.
Yes, yeah. And now we have we had the exercise scientist bodybuilder. Now we have the exercise scientist powerlifters.
Oh yeah, now that's happened.
Right? Yeah. That's kind of a more recent development.
The weightlifters were actually doing it before any of the other ones, but nobody cares about that.
Yeah, that's right. They were doing it, 70 years ago. But
The original pioneers of quote unquote exercise science research were weightlifters. A lot of them.
Yes.
Was Mike Stone, he was publishing in the 70s and 80s. He's a weightlifter. That's where a lot of the NSCA stuff comes from. But yeah, no, the bodybuilder exercise scientist, then powerlifter exercise scientist. But I just had this in my head, like I had to do 8 to 10 reps. And then one day I just saw the guy doing 225 in the gym for like 10 reps. And I'm like, I can't do anywhere near that. Why the fuck would I look like him?
Yeah, it finally clicked.
Yeah, it just finally clicked. So I'm like, I need to get stronger. I have to get stronger. So I just was obsessed with that. And I haven't stopped training for strength. So I guess I've been training for strength for 10 years, although my training now is kind of BS, but I happen to be putting a few pounds on the damn bar somehow.
Right.
But the coolest thing that I did was from that point, 3 years, I got stronger, and there were a few key lessons I learned. Number one, deadlifting and pressing brought up every one of those weak points I bitched about. Let me repeat that. I hated that my arms wouldn't grow. I hated that I didn't have visible deltoid caps, right? And some of that's genetic. Like my brother has really good insertions, so his pop out naturally more. But I could not see my lateral deltoids, and I did not have, and my biceps wouldn't grow, and my lats would grow wider, but I wouldn't have any evidence of traps. So the middle of my back was just completely flat. I would just get this wide back,
right.
And I thought maybe it was all body fat, which is why I tried to diet down when I was younger, and that didn't work. And then I thought maybe I just can't grow these muscles. Well, you know what? When you can keep your back straight and you have 400 to 500 pounds pulling the other way, those muscles grow really fast. Yes. So it's just a misunderstanding of the deadlift and how it works. But the deadlift brought up all those trap muscles and like that, right?
Right.
And then the deltoid situation, that pretty much improved with a 200-pound press.
There you go.
And like even now, like I'm sitting at like, I don't know, I'm probably 20% body fat, and I can still see my damn deltoid caps, which I'm very, and it's funny because when I was younger, I'm like, man, if I could just have decent shoulder definition, I wouldn't care that I'm a little bit fatter,
Right. Yeah. There you go. Yeah. So I think what you're describing here is that, so first of all, this is good, right? This is part of the reason why you listen to a coach like yourself, is that you've done everything, right? Everything that you can possibly do, every approach you can take, you've pretty much done it, and you've been there. So that's like, so you come from a place of experience in addition to having a good theoretical understanding of how this stuff works. But I think the other thing that you're showing us here is that the misunderstandings that we have now. So this is what I think is interesting. Like you, I had not been exposed to these big barbell lifts before I, actually ran into some serious power lifters, weightlifters. But not only that, so I think nowadays people are much more likely to have attempted a squat or a deadlift in a regular public gym. Yeah. But what people misunderstand is the magnitude of this stuff. They might say like, oh, well, I tried deadlifting and it didn't do it for me. It's like, but they don't understand what the magnitude of a strong deadlift is. If you're a lady and you're not deadlifting in the 200s, like you haven't really gotten to a baseline level of strength. If you're a guy and you're not deadlifting in the 300s, like you're really not getting to like a basic baseline of strength. And then of course, like you get into the 400s, 500s as a guy, and all of a sudden this stuff, these body parts that you've been wanting to develop finally fall into place. And so there's both a misunderstanding in what it takes, like the actual types of movements you need to do to build the body you want. And then there's the magnitude of what it looks like. What does strong really look like in practical real life terms? Yeah. And that's essentially what I ended up learning over the long haul. The coolest thing was this is kind of when it all came together this was 2016. I had worked with a coach who fit all those criteria we talked about. And I hired him because I thought he was, had nutrition expertise that I had missed out on, because I was more academically trained. So yeah,
I hired this guy, and at the time I had finished my novice program, and I was, heavier, and I did it on purpose. I drank the gallon of milk a day, which not everybody needs to drink a gallon of milk a day, but somehow in Rip's messaging in the book and on the, various publications he's put up, you got all these people, myself included, that interpreted this as, well, you need to drink a gallon of milk a day. You're just too damn skinny. If you're 18 to 25 and you're underweight, you need to drink a gallon of milk a day. Otherwise, you don't. I probably didn't. I can gain weight without it. But anyways, I did it. I didn't care. I wasn't like butthurt by the fact that I put on some extra weight. I knew that it might happen, but I was my own guinea pig. Anyways, I hired this guy. We took the weight off. That part was great. Then when it came to putting the weight back on, this is where I had some real learning experiences, because this is what I was paying for. I'm like, every time I put the weight on, I gain a bunch of body fat, right? Mm-hmm. Well, long story short, the same thing happened. I gained a bunch of fucking body fat. I barely got stronger than I was before I'd put the weight on. So I'm one of these guys that can lift a decent amount and not have to be really heavy to do it, with the exception of the bench press. Some of the people who have followed me before have seen that demonstrated. And, I went from 168 back up to like 205. And then I was I was missing a 400 squat and I couldn't deadlift more than 455, which, for people in the lifting circle, it's not impressive. And, I'm like, I got to lose this weight. And I wanted to overcorrect it. I'm like, I just want to get ripped. I want to see what the hell it looks like, how light I am, Yeah. And I predicted that I'd be closer to 160 pounds to accomplish this. And sure enough, I lost the first 20 with this guy. I swapped him out, went to another guy, and then he hired a RP to do my diet. And that's how I ended up working with them. And I learned some key things there. So when I was working with my diet coach, I got to a point where I was starving. And this is usually where I would stop dieting. And I was probably like 170 to 175, at the time. And I'm like, dude, I'm like freaking starving. I'm like, this can't be right. Then he's like, dude, no, you're going to be hungry. He's like, if it was freaking easy, then everybody would be walking around jacked, And I'm like, yeah, right. Oh, no shit. I'm like, this really isn't that healthy to do, And it's like anything else, you compete in a sport, it's not healthy. Competitive sports are not healthy from a musculoskeletal standpoint. Getting ripped is not healthy. So I don't recommend that people try to walk around ripped, but if you do it once in a while, it's probably not as bad as, having a drink once in a while. So, I pushed my body. Then I'm like, okay, I know what I got to do. I just got to sustain this insane hunger. So I did it. And then I got down to about, I think 11.9% body fat was the lowest I clocked on a DEXA. And I could see everything. So that debunked a few things. So number one, I wasn't 10% body fat and I can see all my muscles. Why? Because I've been training heavy for years at that point, Right. So I mean, I think I finished that cut with, a deadlift in the mid 400s, a squat in the high 300s, a bench in the high 200s, and a press in the high 100s. When I was heavier, before I lost the last 20 pounds, I was lifting more than that, obviously, and I eventually lifted more than that, a few pounds heavier. So I went down to 162, and then I went up to 175, and I got to a 500 deadlift, 405 squat, and 210 press, and 290 bench at that weight. Now I'm lifting more than that, but I weigh more. Anyways, right. It was kind of cool because I'm like, okay, I'm not 10% body fat, but I thought you had to be 10% body fat to see abs. Well, I wasn't, and I saw abs, because I had muscle mass. So that was the other thing that I learned was, the way that I explain it to people in simple terms is a fat guy that trains looks better than a fat guy that doesn't train. So then you extrapolate that, and that. Go to a construction yard or any type of manual labor type job, and you're going to see these guys don't look like the fat couch potato or the fat accountant. The fat construction worker looks different than the guy at the same weight who's sitting there, programming or doing accounting or some other sedentary job.
Yeah, these guys all look like Popeye, rolling around the job site. So, I'm not saying be a fat, strong guy, but I'm saying that body fat gets distributed and appears differently on your body when you lift weights, and that was apparent at a lower body fat. So, okay, why can I see all this at 11%? Well, number one, I have a even body fat distribution, but more importantly, I trained. So before I got down to 155 pounds, 150 pounds at 13%. But I wasn't training the way I was now. So I try to really hammer this to people because all I was doing to lose that weight were those 5 fucking exercises. I wasn't doing curls and 10 sets of 10 and all this other bullshit. I was squatting. I was deadlifting. I was doing a ton of sets. I was in the gym a long time. So if I were to cut now, I would do high reps. I'd do 8 to 10 reps. I wouldn't do 15, but I do 8 to 10 because it's lighter and more manageable when you're on a diet. But back then I was like, well, I want to stay strong, so I'm going to do 7 sets of 5. And, I did it, and it was miserable, and I only lost 5% of my strength when I did the math on it. But the point that I'm trying to hammer to here, to, my listeners that have
followed my material before and also new people that are completely naive to this, is you really only need a handful of fucking exercises to look good and be strong and useful. It's the bottom line. That's what I did. I looked like a fitness model, but I was training like a power lifter, you know?
Right, yeah. And it's now
it's the stereotypes, that we need to clarify here.
That's right. And what's interesting that I've learned in my own journey as a coach is that we've come from a physical culture standpoint. We've finally come full circle. And that what you just said, if you go back to some of the very early weightlifters, like pre-bodybuilding years, back in the 40s, John Grimmick was a competitive weightlifter at the time who in his later years became an early bodybuilder. Mm-hmm. So the guy has some famous poses of him with like a spear, he looks like Mars or, like the Roman god. And John Grimmick was big and jacked and muscular and not crazy lean, but, he had great muscle definition. Well, the thing was, John Grimmick trained his entire career in probably 5 or 6 exercises. Mm-hmm. He was squatting, he was deadlifting, he was cleaning, he was pressing, and it's kind of funny to me that like these guys, that was just self-evident to them back then. They're like, well, yeah, of course. Like, what else would I do?
Yeah,
to get it
obvious
to look like
well,
this.
Well, they had limitations too. They didn't have upright support benches back then.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's
there were no machines.
Floor press maybe.
Yeah, there were no machines.
But so yeah, it's kind of funny that we've come back, full circle. But I think along the way we've learned some things. We've been able to, validate some of the early kind of revelations that these physical culturists and these lifters and early bodybuilders had, where they sort of figured things out intuitively of like, hey man, when I do this happens, and this works, this doesn't work. And I think over the years we've been able to validate some of those things with the science and as it catches up to what we've known. Just from experience.
And let's be clear here. This doesn't just apply to the bodybuilder or the power lifter. Like I said, I achieved the physique of a fitness model. And, you can go to my Instagram and go back 2016. You'll see the fucking photos. And mm-hmm. I was training like a damn power lifter. So this kind of goes back to what you have to work with, right? First of all, if you're built small like I am, you're only going to get so far. I'm not going to make myself look like a thick-boned guy, first of all, Yeah,
you're not going to be The Rock.
No. So, I get a lot of clients that are like, they fall in the skinny fat category. You'll get a guy who's, 6'2", and he's 205, but he has no definition. And he thinks he needs to lose fat and be 175. Or you'll get a guy who's 5'9" and thinks he needs to be 140. I had a guy get down to 139 once for this because they want muscle definition. But you look at their lifts and, okay, you're squatting 95 pounds, 8 inches high, which means shallow for, those of you not familiar with the terminology.
Right,
You're squatting shallow, not going deep. You're not deadlifting at all. You're not pressing at all. I mean, you're doing a bunch of conditioning. I mean, if you want to do a bunch of cardio and be skinny, that's what happens when you train for endurance. You're very skinny, you're very skinny. You might be defined, you might not. But you don't look muscular. And by muscular, I don't mean a bodybuilder or a power lifter. I could be talking about the guy on the cover of Fitness Magazine, or these Instagram guys, So it still comes back to you have to push your muscles beyond their limit in order to develop them to appear that way, Again, I want to repeat this again. This is important for those listeners because that's who I'm really trying to reach here. If you're one of these guys that wants to be long and lean or tone or whatever you call it these days, right? You don't want to be big, right? But you want to look like you're doing something. You still have to overload those muscles. It still has to get heavy, and heavy for you might be different than heavy for me, but you can't go in there and lift light weights and make it feel like cardio because it's a completely different stimulus, and I find that that's the trend now. When I get Gen Pop individuals that are, you might find it in LA Fitness or in Anytime Fitness, or, maybe they do the CrossFit WODs for 50 minutes every day. They have this idea that all forms of exercise need to feel like a heart attack, like you're doing, like you're running a marathon. And when you're in the weight room, the purpose of if you want to use weightlifting for boot camp style workouts because they're fun, that's one thing. But if you're lifting weights because you want your muscles to look better, that really means you want them to get bigger, whether you know it or not. You have to stress that muscle with heavier and heavier weight. And any way you kind of spin it, it's going to end up defaulting to that. So even if you're doing quote unquote volume, which really means high reps, 8 to 10 reps,
right.
and more sets, I guess. So you might, instead of doing 5 by 5, you might do 4 sets of 10 or 5 sets of 10, or if you're doing German volume training, 10 sets of 10, right? And this is like probably the most popular way to train overall. Like, we're still a niche, unfortunately. If you go into a commercial gym or you get a starting strength naive person off the street, they're going to tell you, I do a bunch of, I just do reps with lighter weight. I don't want to go heavy because I'm not trying to get big. That's still the dominant belief in most gyms, or even most people that, may watch TV and don't go to the gym, or go sometimes. They might just think, I need to do like 10 reps with a decent amount of weight. I don't need to really go heavy, though. I don't have to go heavy because I don't want to get big. It's like,
right.
You're skinny. To get bigger than where you are now, the same rule applies. You have to lift more than you can lift now. So
Yes.
even if that means getting yourself to a 300 deadlift or a 200 deadlift because it's 95 today, it has to get heavier. If you're doing 10 sets of 10, the weight that you're lifting for 10 sets of 10 also has to get heavier, because what are you going to do, 20 sets of 10? I mean, and then at what point do you run out of time,
Exactly. Yeah. Then it becomes another marathon, right?
Yeah.
It's a weightlifting marathon.
Now it's an endurance workout. And endurance workouts don't build muscle. That's not their point. With few exceptions, in general, if you're looking at a magazine, you see a guy with muscles popping out, that means he's probably stronger than you are. And that means you need to get stronger than you are today if you want to get closer to that.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, there's the groundwork. You got to get stronger. It's the basis for all physical adaptations that you want. Mm-hmm. Including if you're that person right now and you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, I kind of am that marathon guy. Well, guess what? Getting stronger is going to help you too. And we're going to talk about that as we go into more episodes on the show. Mm-hmm. So, but I think this is interesting. Not a lot of people in our world, in our strength and conditioning world, have talked a lot about the physical culture aspect of, how do we get here? And how do we get to the point where all of the, I think there's always been some amount of misinformation and mythology out there about how training works. But, how do we get to where we are here today in 2021, and the misconceptions that continue to float around and that we run into every day when we're coaching clients? So that's, I hope you found that interesting. And I'd encourage you, if you like this kind of stuff, go pick up Arnold's encyclopedia. It's a great, it's entertaining. It's you can get a little snapshot of what people were thinking. That was revolutionary at the time. So you can get a snapshot of what was revolutionary for its time, and see how people's thought process about fitness has evolved over the years. Go back and look at some of the old weightlifters, the Eugene Sandows, the Paul Andersons, the John Grimmicks of the world, and you can kind of trace this evolution of physical culture through the years.
Yeah, no, it's great. The Arnold book's a great history book. And like I said, the general principles were always there. That's why I have a hard time making fun of it. But God, they didn't know how to lift, and you can't expect them to. They weren't technique coaches. They were they were genetic freaks that were gifted to build muscle and get strong. So
yes,
they showed they were right about the exercises. They were wrong about how to execute them. They were wrong about how to program them in the absence of steroid use. But it led me to rip.
That's right. They still got some of the basics right, for sure.
It's great to read the Arnold book and then read Starting Strength, because you'll see some of the overlap, and then you'll see where they're wrong too, obviously.
Right. Yes, absolutely.
Because Rip does a good job of going through that historical account as well, which I appreciated.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think sometimes, again, here in 2021 now, we may not appreciate. Starting Strength has enjoyed some public notoriety, and a lot of people have heard of Starting Strength, even if they don't know what it's about. They've heard that name and maybe even seen the book floating around, which was not the case just 10 years ago. So it's hard for if you've already heard Starting Strength before you actually read the book, it's hard to imagine how different it was when it came out in 2005. It's just like a complete shift in the way that you think and about barbells and strength training, and one of the few books to really lay out these first principles, these just basically basic ground principles that you can build an entire training program off of. So I think that's what we're going to do in the following episodes, is go through some more principles and talk about training, talk about kind of where the rubber meets the road, and solving like practical issues, right? So if you're that person that you described that's skinny fat, and you're not a big guy, you're not a big girl, you're not a little girl, you're somewhere in between, and you're in the bell curve, and you're like, what do I do? Like I've it hasn't worked doing X, Y, and Z. Where am I missing the mark? Well, we're going to talk about that. And one of the things you're going to have to learn is the basic principles of fitness. And once you learn those, then, you can start to build a practical program, and you'll know what to do when you go in the gym. You'll have an idea of where to go.
Yeah, I like that. I think that's a good stopping point, huh?
Yeah, no, I think that's good. All right, guys. Well, if people want to find you, Roberts, where do they go if they want to get in touch with you, if they want to find you? We know you're on startingstrength.com. You can read some of your articles there. Where else should they go to follow you?
You can go to weightsandplates.com. That is my website. I am on Instagram, although I might take a while to answer there because I hate Instagram, but people tend to reach out to me there, so I check the messages. _Robert_Santana. And you can also find me on renaissanceperiodization.com. I coach for them and have content on their website as well.
Excellent. Yeah. Renaissance Periodization. That's a very cool software programs for managing your diet and nutrition.
It's a great coaching. It's an app that acts as a coach. It's pretty neat. I recommend it. I don't have one of my own. I've walked people through it. It's great, and I'm actually trying to use it right now to clean my stuff up. But it's like MyFitnessPal, except it tells you, okay, you got to cut here, add there.
Yeah,
it's great.
Well, my name is Trent Jones again, and you can find me at marmalade_cream. If you stick around long enough in this podcast, maybe I'll reveal the secret of where that name comes from. That's what everyone asks me. It's like, what the heck? Marmalade cream? What? But you can find me there. See, it's memorable. Yeah. You remember now. Yeah. Marmalade cream. That's where you can find me. Well, thanks, guys, for listening to the show. Tune in next time, and we're going to talk some more fitness and training and nutrition.